Hi, Sylvia. Welcome to the Integrative Health Coach Success Podcast.
Hi, Julia. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to have you. I always get excited when we get to have our own equal life coaches on, because even though we're always in meetings together, it is always nice to just be able to sit one-on-one and get to know each other a little bit more. So I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely.
Let's start by you sharing with our listeners a little bit about what you're currently doing, kind of in the health and wellness space. And then we'll back it up because I think kind of what you were doing right out of school is super interesting. And I'd love to know how you got from A to B. So let's start with what you're currently doing.
Yeah, so happy to share that story. So right now I am a health coach at Equal Life. I started with Equal Life about a year and a half ago now it's been, I think. And I am actively coaching clients, our wellness clients. And I'm also involved in training our newer health coaches. So I'm also working alongside another health coach in training the newcomers right now.
Yes, which there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So it's a busy job.
Lately. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. So share with us a little bit kind of what you did, out of school. What were you doing initially, and kind of how did you transition to, being in the health and wellness field?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a long story, but I'm not going to go into a lot of details. So I grew up in a family of medical doctors, like everybody in my family and their brother is a physician. And so I really early on had a lot of interest in the healthcare space. I really thought it was a fascinating job to have. It was just really my interest to, in some way, in some capacity down the road, be involved in healthcare and be able to help others. But I also saw how, in a way, dysfunctional that system was, because my family, my parents specifically, my dad is a surgeon, my mom pediatrician, now she's retired, but they were in the space, for many years, and they just burned out doing what they're doing. They were really just in the business of prescribing medicines and prescribing, drugs, and they didn't have a lot of time to spend with their patients. And it was taking a toll on their health. My mom was just exhausted. My dad had really high blood pressure, high cholesterol. And eventually they burned out and had to retire early. And I kind of saw that as as much as I wanted to be in the space of helping others, I just really didn't want to go into conventional medicine, because I saw what a toll that took on my family and my parents being in that career. And so when I went to college, I really kind of was thinking about what I should study. And, one thing led to another, sort of had to make a decision, and went into finance because I wanted to be practical. That was my mom's idea. Wanted to be practical. And so I went into finance, and long story short, I lived in London for a little bit. I was working in financial services there and in marketing. And then I went back to New York and got a job there, and was in Goldman Sachs actually for a while, working as doing portfolio management or working with a portfolio management team. But I was just never satisfied with that job. It wasn't something that I really deep down, I knew it wasn't for me. It wasn't something that I had interest in. And it was making me very miserable and very unhealthy. I was just struggling with depression, anxiety. And I, one thing led to another. Sort of talked to a lot of friends, like trying to figure out what to do next. And signed up for a yoga teacher training, because at the time I was really actively practicing yoga with a local teacher. And I signed up for her training and did my yoga teacher training in 2011 and started teaching. And so that sort of opened the door to other possibilities for me in terms of like what I saw myself doing. And teaching was great. And, I sort of got into Ayurveda through yoga, visited different ashrams and learned about Ayurvedic medicine, Ayurvedic nutrition, got certified in Ayurvedic nutrition, and decided to leave my corporate job. And then sort of one thing led to another again, like signed up for Integrative Health, IAN basically, which is something that you also attended, the Institute of Integrative Nutrition.
Yes.
Which at the time we actually had to travel to New York. And then I decided to dig a little deeper, go a little further, and get my master's in nutrition. So I signed up for a 2-year program at the University of Bridgeport, which is kind of locally here in Connecticut, close to me, so I could travel. I was just traveling there on weekends, and that in parallel with working a corporate job, right? But then I eventually started to transition out of that job, out of finance, and into working in the health and wellness space. And I was lucky enough because at the University of Bridgeport, I got introduced to a lot of people in the functional medicine space, including Dr. David Brady and Dr. Kara Fitzgerald. And I actually ended up going to work with Kara Fitzgerald for a little while in Connecticut, just about a year, which was like an internship that I was doing with her. And then I just started my own practice after that, worked in Boston for a little while, worked with one of Dr. Cabral's colleagues for a little while, and had really heard a lot about Dr. Cabral, had been listening to the podcast, really was interested in what he was doing because I loved how he combines the naturopathic medicine with Ayurvedic medicine, with functional medicine, and really was putting into one everything that I was passionate about and everything that I'd studied. And I reached out and wanted to see if there was an opportunity for me to join his team. And sure enough, there was. It was the right timing. It was very serendipitous. But yeah, and so here I am today here with you guys.
Yeah. Oh, such an interesting story because finance and, we have people that do the podcast, they've come from, being a pharmacist or, some sort of evolution from something medical to, maybe more holistic or whatnot, but from finance to health it's an amazing swing.
Yeah, it was. And I always wanted to be in healthcare. I just didn't know in what capacity. Mm-hmm. And looking at my parents and seeing how, difficult that was for them. I just definitely didn't want to do the conventional medicine route. Right. And I think everything happens for a reason. I went into finance to really find out what I wanted to do in the end. Right. Because that sort of, being in that space, being so sort of confined in the space that I was just not feeling happy, not feeling satisfied, really made me kind of pushed me on my path to finding something that really resonated with me and finding the functional medicine, sort of world and natural healing.
And who knows if you weren't in a job that kind of burnt you out in a way, or, you didn't go the practical route, you always maybe would have guessed, should I have gone the practical route? Or if you didn't do that, maybe you would never have found yoga because you didn't need it in the way that you did. And so, like you said, everything happens for a reason. Yeah,
exactly. I do believe that.
Yes. So along with being a health coach and having a history in finance, you're also a mom of 4. You have a set of twins and you recently had your 4th child. So what I think would be great for us to do with the listeners is if we kind of honed in on, child nutrition. It's something that you're very passionate about. And what I would love you to kind of share with us first, and then we'll get into some more details, is how do you approach kind of health, nutrition, wellness, because your kids aren't, it's not like they're teenagers where you can kind of sit down and have these intellectual conversations with them. How do you handle and approach health and wellness in your home with your kids?
Yeah, great question. It's not always an easy thing, but we try the best we can, right? I mean, I have, a set of twins. My daughter's 6 now, and my baby, he's just about to turn 1. And for me, it's always been about what example I set for them. And I think you and I had spoken about this in the past, but when you have little children, I think they're like sponges. They really watch you and what you do, and they're really absorbing all of that, how you behave, what you say, what you put in your mouth, what you put in your body, right? I mean, all of these things, as much as we don't sometimes realize impact them, really do impact them and really shape their behaviors in a way. And when they say the first 7 years of a child's development in life are the most important ones, it is true, because that's when you really shape who they are or who they're going to be as a human being. Obviously, later on, they're going to have other influences, but you are that person that they're looking up to. And for me, it's always been about, I have to take care of myself. I have to eat the best way possible and modeling that for them, because when they see me doing that, they're much more likely to do that as well. So we do a lot of, I do go the extra mile. Sometimes people say, oh, you're crazy, like having so much energy. I don't have energy, but that's a priority for me because I really understand how important nutrition is for young children, for growing bodies, right? And for their development. And so for me, I prioritize cooking meals at home, making things from scratch, teaching them how to make things from scratch. growing their own food. Now we are lucky enough to live in a place where we have a lot of space and a lot of land. So we're able to have a garden, which we've had in the past too, in a small capacity, but it's just a much larger scale now. So they get to see that. They get to see how plants are grown, where food comes from, how much work and labor and love goes into growing your own food. And they learn to appreciate it that much more, and yeah, so they always say to me, I love vegetables, mommy. And I'm so happy. I'm sure that it's not going to be like that forever, but for at least right now, we kind of,
Yeah. Well, the foundation is so important because might they go to, college, or as they're teenagers eat, whatever they kind of are having at their friend's house, but laying that foundation, I think always gives them. And when you were talking, it's just like this almost respect for food, right? Because I think living in a modern society, we lose the touch of like what it means to access food. It's just always available. Like there is no, grow it, pick it, prepare it, the steps that are involved that, you clearly are working on with your kids. At my house, sometimes the groceries show up on the front steps. My kids will like rip the bags open and they put it away. But I mean, that's not how I grew up. Like I would go to the grocery store and shop with my mom, and, I hated it. And she dragged me through the grocery store. And some kids don't even have to experience that these days. Forget actually watching it grow and, see that process. And I think the more kids know about anything, the more respect and kind of curiosity they have. Right. And so getting kids curious about healthy foods and I think is huge. And you also mentioned one other point that I think is the key is that you're the model, right? But I've never met any child that chooses to just eat salad while their parents are, consuming, French fries and cheeseburgers. If it's not modeled, it's likely going to be very hard to then be of interest to the child.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think that, again, what you do at home matters so much more than what they see outside of the home. Of course, there are influences. I mean, my daughter, for instance, came home yesterday and she said she hadn't eaten her lunch. And I asked her why. And she said, well, because my friends don't like to look at vegetables. They don't eat vegetables. And I try to explain to her, right? Everybody's individual. Everybody makes their own decisions when it comes to food, but you have to know that this is something that's really important for your growth, for your development. And, we just really explain it instead of becoming confrontational or really trying to fight that battle, which is sometimes a battle you're just never going to be able to win. Just really explaining to them what is the benefit of eating this way? Like, why is this important? And then again, just you being the model, being the example, when they see you doing certain things and how it's affecting you, they're much more likely to follow suit.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband drinks coffee. I don't drink coffee. I'll drink, matcha tea here and there. But I don't drink a lot of caffeine in general. And my son recently was like, Mama, how come you don't drink espresso? We have an espresso machine. How come you don't drink Nespresso with Daddy? Or I said, because I don't like the way it makes me feel. It makes me, feel anxious and jittery. And I explained kind of all of that to him. And he was like, oh, kind of like if I ate too much sugar. And I was like, yep, exactly. So when you explain, I think a lot of people think kids are like just kids and they're only capable of like understanding and thinking in, very simple ways, but they'll think and act to the exact standard that you hold them to. And so if you're educating them and you're including them in the conversation, like they rise to that and then they're thinking on their own. And then maybe the next time, they eat something, they think about the way it makes them feel. Cause that's the truth is, you never want to make it about what you look like or any of that. With kids, it's just about, does the food give you energy? Does it make you feel, happy? Those are, so important.
Yeah. And it's also important to teach kids how to tune in their own bodies, as you said, and just really notice how the food really affects them, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally sometimes, right? I mean, my daughter notices immediately after she eats a lot of sugar, she gets very agitated in a way, and starts almost like bouncing off the walls, right? And we always kind of stop and kind of discuss this a little bit because it is important for her to notice that certain foods affect her in certain ways. So she knows kind of, and she's 6, she's not really able to make rational decisions about this yet, but at least having that awareness, I think it's really important. And for instance, certain things that they're eating, like dairy, has been a big one for us because both of my twins actually have dairy sensitivity. And as soon as they have something containing dairy, and yes, of course, like we do go to parties and we do go to people's homes for, birthdays and stuff like that. And sometimes we do have it. There's no way of avoiding it completely, but they immediately notice if their stomach feels off. And when we get home, like we kind of talk about that. We say, yes, you can have this every once in a while, but just be aware that it's not going to make you feel the best. And it's probably best for you to stay away from it as much as possible. So they never really want it on a day-to-day basis, but sometimes obviously there's going to be the instances when we have to kind of deal with it. But yeah, kind of bringing the awareness to that is important.
Yeah, absolutely. To all of your kids, I'm curious because I did the same thing with my two children. Same exact thing from, they were both nursed. I introduced the same foods, and I have one super picky eater and one who, my gosh, he's like a dream. He will eat anything. Like he asks me to make him salads. Like he'll eat sardines. He's a great eater. Are all your kids, do they have the same appetites? Are any of them pickier than others?
I'm really lucky. And my mom and I had this conversation the other day. I have my children eat everything. They just love everything. Everything that I serve to them, with the exception of a few things, maybe like bok choy has been a little bit of a debate whether or not we should have that for dinner. But, they do eat pretty much anything. And again, we do, you talked about this recently. We do on Instagram. I remember seeing a post, but we do give them the same food we eat. So everybody eats the same thing. I always tell them, we have a lot of people to feed. We're not going to cook 5 or 6 different meals for everybody. You're going to have to learn to eat what everybody else eats. And that's kind of how it's been from day one. Even the baby, he's almost 1. He has 4 teeth now. So he's able to chew a little bit. And so he's eating sardines, he's eating rice, he's eating beans like everybody else. And, he's just learning how to love it. And it's just kind of developing those tastes and developing those taste buds, I think, early on. I think it's just really, really important.
Yeah. I think one, on that topic, I think one thing that society kind of falls short on is I feel like there's so many parents who aren't doing this necessarily consciously, but there's so many parents that kind of think kids don't have these refined enough palates, and kids are just they want kid food, right? You look at kids menus in restaurants, or even, I'm going to make dinner for me and my husband, but then I'm going to give the kids, I don't know, chicken fingers and, nuggets shaped like dinosaurs. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I think the awareness needs to come to the fact that kids will appreciate and eat exactly what they're, given from the start. And if you immediately, start them with kid food and not give them the taste of what fruits, vegetables, and all that other stuff tastes like, it's hard to kind of switch. I have friends who are I need to start feeding my kids better, but it's so hard to get them off the, nuggets, the pizza, whatever it may be. And I think it's so important to kind of give these kids taste right from the beginning of real food that, adults do eat.
Yeah, absolutely. And because once they develop those habits, it's just really hard to break them. So if you allow them to eat, junk from the very beginning, it's just going to be really hard. That battle is going to be really difficult to fight because it's going to be hard to change those habits. And I think, the earlier you start, the better. With my latest one, the baby, he is, almost a year old now. And I breastfed. I was lucky enough to be able to breastfeed for about 6 months. But after that, we had to make the decision whether we're going to go into formula feeding or we're going to start, reintroducing solid foods. And we're kind of doing both for a little while. My mom, luckily for me, she's a retired pediatrician, so she's been helping me a lot with that. But we started feeding him solids very early on, pureeing certain things, but then most of the time he would just eat pieces of fish here and there, a little bit of broccoli. He would chew on it and get as much of it as he can. But we started doing that early on. And now he's just pretty much eating the same things we're eating at the table. And he sits with us and he eats.
Yeah, I did that with my kids from the beginning too, because even at that age, even if it's your first child, but for you, it's your fourth, like you said, you could drive yourself crazy making everybody these a la carte dinners. I do the same with my kids. I'm like, this is what we're having for dinner. I usually have like a variation, like, okay, my daughter wants more rice than she wants animal protein, or my son wants more animal protein and hold the rice. But I'm not making everybody a different meal. That's for sure. Cause I think that's just, it's crazy.
Yeah, and first, one way to really make things interesting has been like spices and flavors. We've learned, and my husband actually noticed that because my husband is from Brazil, so we do use a lot of different condiments when we cook, and that has been really key because in cooking for us, because that makes the food just taste interesting, right? And you can have so many different variations of the same meal by adding different spices and different flavors, and we've noticed that our children just really gravitate towards food that is flavored, that has a lot of different spices, and they just love that. So if you're serving something that's really bland, like just, boiled broccoli or whatever, it's just not as good as like maybe throwing a little bit of garlic, a little bit of black pepper and salt and turmeric, and just giving that to them is just a lot different. It's just, you're not, again, like going back to giving them kids food. Sometimes kids food tends to be like really bland and simple. And we kind of do the opposite. We really put a lot of spice and a lot of flavors into the food that makes it, for them more palatable, I think.
Yeah. And doesn't taste so, like you said, bland and, quote unquote boring.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've already given us tips along the way, but I'm curious if you were to give, so maybe someone's listening, an IHP or another mom, and they're like, oh my gosh, my kids are picky eaters, or I tried this, would there be like one tip that you would give, to whether it maybe just be when you're starting out, or even when kids are a little bit older, for kind of nutrition and in kids?
Yeah, with picky eaters, I mean, it comes and goes for me too sometimes. With my daughter, she has had moments when she just was not really into certain foods and was more selective. And for me, I think that it is important to let also children have their own opinion about what feels good to them and what doesn't, and not force anything. Because sometimes there's a reason. I mean, let's say like somebody is sick, or they have a stomach ache, or, they naturally will be a little bit less inclined to eat certain things. And I think like sometimes you just have to allow them to listen to those cues and really listen to their body. At the same time, if a child is really, really picky and it's really difficult to get them to eat, I think it is important to get them as involved as possible in the food preparation process, because if they engage, if they participate, they're much more likely then to want to eat that food. I think that, having them involved and having them engaged, I think it's really, really key. And additionally, just asking them what they like, asking them for their opinion, like say, okay, how do you want this prepared? What would make that more interesting to you, or what would make you want to eat this? Should we blend it in a smoothie, or should we make it in a soup? Or, just have them have their opinion as well, because sometimes, although we do cook for the whole family, and we're not always going to make individual meals, it is important to also ask them what they enjoy and what they would like to have.
And it goes back
a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to kind of treating them with that respect. Again, I think, culturally, it's like, kids should be seen and not heard. And like, they're kids, and there's, but they have the same developmental abilities when it comes to like thought, of course, like their brain's developing, but they're able to know, what their body feels like and what they need and what tastes good to them, and kind of honoring that, doesn't make it seem like they're a prisoner to their own, food choices, but that they can be involved. And I have a husband who came from, the kind of upbringing where like you cleaned your plate, and if you didn't clean your plate, like you weren't getting dessert. And it's been like total deprogramming, because I'm like, they're not going to be forced to finish their food, because then that is a signal, right? That you're asking them to stop listening to their body and force, food that doesn't feel good. That's a learned behavior to like over consuming, I'm like, and then that leads to even other choices that feel like overconsumption. And I'm like, so no, they'll know when they're full.
Yeah. And again, like there are certain foods I think that may not make them feel necessarily great. And again, just in really encouraging them to, and they know that innately, something is off, like I don't feel good eating this, but they can't really verbalize it or tell you exactly what it is that they're experiencing. So it is important to sometimes really talk to them as an adult, like ask them these questions and get them to be, again, more involved in the whole process of food preparation. And even in my case, like I just get them from the very beginning to start growing things, see them how they grow, see them like how they, the food, where the food comes from. And I think for them, that just spikes that curiosity and just makes them much more likely to want to then eat that food.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any, I know you love podcasts and books and you're well educated. Do you have any like favorite, podcasts or books or around like kids nutrition? I know you probably have a million other things that aren't about kids and nutrition, but anything kid related?
Not specifically kids related. I really love listening to Dr. Zach Bush. I don't know if you know him. He's really about, growing your own food, basically, the whole movement of getting back to nature, getting outside, really regenerative agriculture, and being able to kind of go back to basics when it comes to food and how we feed ourselves and how we feed the gut microbiome. So he's been somebody I've been deeply inspired by, and he kind of pushed me on my sort of path towards gardening and growing food. And I really, he's just sort of the person I follow the most right now. And I can't think of anything related to kids' nutrition necessarily. I mean, I was listening a lot to Julie Matthews in the past, who's like more specializing in like working with autistic children and specialized diets based on that. So I kind of followed her. And Healthy Kids, Happy Kids by Dr. Sung is another one that I think about kind of off the top of my head, because she has some really great information about, how to feed kids, what are, good ways to kind of prepare meals for kids, specifically nutritious meals for kids. And so that's really it. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of time to listen to a lot of different podcasts, but those are a few that kind of come to mind or have stuck with me.
Yeah, no, those are all great suggestions. And I think the title of the last one that you mentioned, I always say, like, our family is happier when everybody's eating well, because everybody's mood's better. Like my kids, when we like go on vacation and like we only have access to certain things and they're eating maybe stuff that they're not used to, like their belly's hurt, then their, behavior slips a little bit. I always say that we're all happiest. Like we have a happy home when everybody's fed well and, feeling their best. And I think that, there's a lot of, behavioral things, attention stuff that happens with kids that causes a lot of stress and divide, even in marriages, but family systems. And sometimes it can be just as simple as like supporting kids' nutrition better and getting them out of deficient states and lowering the inflammation in their body. And then you have a quote unquote happier kid. And then that leads to, a more happy home environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that. And you see the difference, when you get children off of processed food, off of, synthetic colors and flavors, you do see the difference in the way they behave. You definitely do. My daughter is very much affected by sugar, processed sugar. Every time she eats candy, she notices that herself. She just says, Mom, I don't feel right. And you can see that in her behavior. She almost acts like she's drunk sometimes. And, it is very interesting how drastically her attitude, her behavior changes. And again, like bringing that to her awareness is really important, and her understanding that certain things don't affect her the right ways is for me really, really important to have those conversations. But yeah, you immediately notice the difference when you start to shift their nutrition and, provide everything that their growing bodies and brains need to function optimally.
Yeah, absolutely. My son recently, they had like a little birthday celebration at the homeschool co-op that they go to, and someone brought cupcakes, and he asked if they had dye in the frosting, and the teacher couldn't really answer the question. And she's like, I don't know if there's dye in them. And so he decided not to have one. And this is the first time he's ever made a choice like that without me being there. And I said to him, how come you didn't have it? And he said, well, because I was just nervous about how it would make me feel. He knows that dyes and natural flavoring and like things that are, synthetic and chemical, more chemicals, kind of don't make him feel, he almost gets like neurologically dysregulated. And he was like, I just didn't want to feel that way. And I was like, oh my God, I wanted to like go buy him a good cup. I was like, I need to find you a cupcake. But I was like, what a great observation and, choice that you made. And he was like, fine with it. He wasn't upset. He wasn't, because like you said it, earlier on, I think when it's their own choice, then they feel empowered rather than me making a call and saying like, Charlie can't have the cupcake. Because I actually don't do that. I do let them choose. So, sometimes if I know that something's going to be really, not good for them, I will step in, but I try not to make it like this anxious, type of decision, especially when they're with other kids. So yeah, it's interesting. They always surprise us.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And yeah, that speaks to how you're able to really instill that in them and like give them that education, provide them with that information. And it has to be done in a very gentle way. Because again, if it's forceful, if it's like, oh, you're the boss, you're the one saying like what needs to happen, they kind of, okay, right now, maybe they will listen to you, but down the road, they'll definitely rebel. So I think instead of going that route, you're much better off just really, allowing them to have things every once in a while. I mean, there's going to be instances when they're going to not be able to really avoid it. It's just the world we live in. It's unfortunate, but it is how it is. And you just have to be able to give them that information, empower them with that information, and then just let them make their own decisions.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
You'll be surprised what they choose.
Because a year and a half ago, he probably wouldn't have made that choice. But he's a little bit older. He's a little bit more mature. He might be noticing, things differently. And the fact that he made and the next time it comes up, he might not, he might have the cupcake. Right. But I think any little glimpse of them, taking their health into their own hands and making choices is, you're kind of like, okay, well, I guess it's working.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to you again, like, what are you modeling for them? Because at the end of the day, like right now, in this time of their life, you are their role model. You are who they look up to, and they just really want to do what you do. Like really, no matter what anybody else around them does, like you are the person they're looking up to for the most part. And so it is important what you do and how you talk it, walk your talk, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. This conversation's been so fun. If people are listening and they kind of want to find out more about you, and you do share some stuff on Instagram, can you share with us where they find you on social media or anything that you want to share more about yourself?
Yeah, social media. I haven't been so active. I have this like love-hate relationship with social media, but Instagram is definitely a place that's, been hanging around, a little bit more these days. So Pure Foods is my handle, Pure Foods Nutrition. And I post some fun things there about kids and nutrition and gardening. So people can definitely follow me and find out more.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Integrative Health Coach Success podcast. It was such a pleasure. And I hope, I bet lots of listeners are going to find this conversation helpful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.